The city bustled with life as the morning sun painted golden hues across the skyline. People went about their daily routines, unaware that in mere hours, their world would crumble. Among them was Ethan Carter, an ex-military medic turned EMT, responding to a series of bizarre 911 calls. Reports of people collapsing and suddenly attacking paramedics sent a wave of unease through the emergency responders. Elsewhere, Sarah Mitchell, a college student, enjoyed breakfast with her roommate, discussing an upcoming party. She laughed at the news reports of violent riots in nearby districts, dismissing them as another case of urban chaos. By noon, chaos erupted. The local hospital, overwhelmed with patients exhibiting aggressive behavior, was locked down. Ethan found himself trapped inside, witnessing a gruesome transformation. A nurse, bitten earlier, suddenly convulsed and attacked a doctor. Within minutes, she was tearing into his throat. The screams of pain and panic filled the air as more patients turned into flesh-hungry creatures. Meanwhile, Sarah was on a bus when it crashed into an abandoned car. A bloodied man, stumbling in front of the vehicle, barely reacted to his crushed legs. His pale eyes fixated on the passengers inside, and within seconds, others like him emerged from nearby streets, pounding on the windows. The driver, panicked, opened the doors to escape, only to be swarmed. Screams and blood splattered across the glass as Sarah and a few others fought their way out. At the police station, Detective Mark Davis monitored a flood of emergency calls, reports of violent assaults, people getting back up after being shot, entire neighborhoods going silent. Officers sent to investigate never reported back. Mark's gut twisted with dread. What a bloodied officer stumbled in, the reality hit hard, something far worse than a riot was happening. Back at the hospital, Ethan's instincts kicked in. He secured himself inside a supply closet, watching through a crack as the dead feasted. He had to get out. Grabbing medical supplies and a fire axe, he braced himself. Survival had just become his new mission. Sarah, running through the streets with a handful of survivors, reached her college dorm. What was once a safe haven now felt like a death trap as students, turned into ravenous monsters, roamed the halls. She needed to find weapons, supplies, and a way out, fast. As night approached, the world as they knew it was gone. The first 24 hours of the apocalypse had begun. Would anyone make it out alive? The sun had barely set, but the city was already unrecognizable. Fires raged, sirens blared, and the screams of the dying were drowned out only by the guttural growls of the undead. Ethan Carter gripped the fire axe tightly, his hands slick with sweat and blood. The hospital hallways, once bustling with life, were now a maze of death. Bodies littered the floor, some twitching, others still. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting eerie shadows. He needed to escape, but how? Every exit he checked was either locked or swarming with zombies. Then, over the hospital's PA system, a voice crackled through the static. "If anyone is still alive, the rooftop. We have a chopper. But we're leaving in 5 minutes." Ethan's heart pounded. He wasn't alone, but if he didn't move fast, he would be. A few blocks away, Sarah Mitchell and a handful of survivors barricaded themselves inside her college dorm's common room. The walls weren't thick, but for now, they held. The emergency power was still running, giving them a brief sense of security. The others, a terrified freshman named Liam, a no-nonsense athlete, Jake, and a quiet but resourceful girl, Emily, all looked to Sarah. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because she hadn't broken down yet. "We can't stay here," she said, gripping a baseball bat she'd taken from the gym. "We need food, water, weapons." Jake crossed his arms. "You saw what's out there. You really want to run through that?" Sarah swallowed hard. He wasn't wrong, but neither was she. Staying meant starving, or worse, turning. Before she could argue, a loud thud hit the window. Everyone froze. A face, half-eaten and dripping with gore, slammed against the glass. More figures emerged from the darkness outside. Their soulless eyes locked onto the survivors. The barricade wouldn't hold for long. At the police station, Detective Mark Davis was running out of options. The officers who hadn't fled were either dead or missing. He had tried calling for reinforcements, but the radios were silent, the emergency lines jammed with desperate voices. Then the power cut out. Mark grabbed his shotgun and flashlight, moving cautiously through the station. He wasn't alone, he could hear them. The heavy, ragged breathing of the undead. He turned a corner and spotted a bloodied officer shuffling toward him. The thing's neck was nearly snapped, its head hanging at an unnatural angle. Damn it. Mark aimed and fired. The blast echoed through the empty halls. He didn't stick around to see if more were coming. He needed a plan. Fast. Ethan sprinted through the hospital, dodging hands that clawed at him from broken doorways. He kicked open the stairwell door, taking the steps 2 at a time. The rooftop wasn't far. He could hear the helicopter blades chopping through the night air. Then, he heard the gunshot. Not from outside. From inside. Someone else was here. For a split second, he hesitated. Run to the chopper, or find the shooter. A scream made the decision for him. Gripping his axe, he turned and ran toward the sound. Sarah and her group had seconds before the barricade broke. The undead pounded relentlessly. Emily grabbed a kitchen knife. Liam held a chair like a makeshift shield. Jake picked up a broken table leg. Sarah took a deep breath. On my count, open the door, and we fight our way out. The first 24 hours weren't over yet. And if they wanted to see another sunrise, they had to survive. The barricade cracked. The wood splintered under the relentless pounding of undead hands. Sarah Mitchell gripped her bat tighter, her knuckles white. She stole a glance at her makeshift team, Jake, the athlete, standing firm, Emily, clutching a kitchen knife with shaking fingers, and Liam, the terrified freshman, barely holding his makeshift chair shield. We do this together. We don't stop swinging until they're down. Sarah shouted. Then the barricade gave way. The first zombie stumbled in, a girl Sarah recognized from her biology class, her throat torn open, dead eyes locked onto them. Sarah swung. The bat connected with a sickening crack, sending the undead girl sprawling. Another corpse lunged for Jake, who rammed a table leg into its skull. Emily screamed as one grabbed her arm, its rotting teeth snapping inches from her skin. Sarah didn't think, she reacted. She bashed the zombie's head in, pulling Emily away before the thing could bite down. Move! Sarah yelled. They bolted for the fire escape. But just as they reached the window, another figure blocked their path, a heavily injured security guard, his uniform drenched in blood. His chest heaved, his breath ragged. You can't go out there, he wheezed. It's worse outside. Sarah hesitated. Then the zombies reached them. There was no more time to think. Meanwhile, at the hospital rooftop, Ethan Carter kicked open the door, stepping onto the roof just in time to see the last survivor climbing into the rescue helicopter. The pilot looked frantic. Come on, someone inside yelled. Ethan ran. His boots pounded against the concrete as he sprinted toward salvation. But just as he reached the helicopter, a bloodied hand grabbed his ankle. He crashed to the ground. A half-eaten paramedic snarled, its teeth snapping inches from his face. Ethan barely had time to react. He swung his fire axe, splitting the zombie's skull in two. The helicopter was lifting off. Wait! Ethan roared, jumping for the ledge. His fingers brushed against the railing, then slipped. He hit the ground hard as the chopper flew away, leaving him behind. Breathing heavily, Ethan rolled onto his back, staring at the burning city below. He was alone. But he wasn't dead. And as long as he was breathing, he would fight. At the police station, Detective Mark Davis moved cautiously through the darkened hallways, his shotgun raised. The power was out, and the only sounds were the distant moans of the undead. He reached the armory door. Locked. Figures, he muttered. Then, a noise behind him. He spun, his flashlight revealing a man, alive, shaking, pointing a gun at him. Back off, the stranger warned. Mark didn't lower his weapon. You're not bitten, are you? No, the man rasped. But I don't trust anyone anymore. Mark could see the fear in his eyes. The man was desperate. Look, Mark said. We don't have to do this. Let's work together. The man hesitated. Then, a zombie tackled him from behind. The stranger's gun went off, the bullet whizzing past Mark's head. Mark fired back, the shotgun blast blowing the zombie off the man. But it was too late. The stranger had been bitten. Mark took a step back as the man collapsed, his breathing ragged. Please, the man begged, tears in his eyes. Don't let me turn into one of them. Mark clenched his jaw. Then he raised his gun. A single shot echoed through the station. Mark reloaded his shotgun. He had a new rule now: trust no one. Sarah, Ethan, and Mark, 3 survivors in 3 different parts of the city. Each one making the same choice. To fight. To survive. To keep moving. The first 24 hours weren't over yet. And the real nightmare was only just beginning. The city was lost. The dead ruled the streets, and the living were being hunted. Every decision now meant life or death. Sarah Mitchell, the escape plan. Sarah's heart pounded as she stared at the injured security guard blocking their escape. Behind them, the barricade had collapsed, and the undead were pouring in. We can't go out there, the guard wheezed. They're everywhere. Sarah clenched her jaw. We don't have a choice. Jake, gripping his broken table leg like a weapon, eyed the blood seeping through the guard's uniform. You're hurt. Have you been? No, the man snapped. It's not a bite. Sarah didn't have time to debate. The zombies were too close. She made a decision. They had to go. Pushing past the guard, she yanked open the fire escape door. A gust of cold night air hit her face. Below, the alley was littered with corpses, some moving, some still. Not safe. Then she spotted it, a delivery truck, its back doors slightly open. That's our way out, she said. The group hesitated. Emily glanced at the zombies closing in. We'll never make it. Sarah tightened her grip on the bat. Then we fight our way through. With a scream, she swung, shattering a zombie's skull. Jake followed, slamming another to the ground. Liam hesitated, until a rotting corpse lunged for him, forcing him to swing wildly. The security guard staggered behind them. Wait, please. Sarah turned back, just in time to see the first bite into his shoulder. The man's scream rang through the night. Sarah's stomach twisted, but there was no time for guilt. They ran. Ethan Carter, trapped in the city of the dead. Ethan stood on the hospital rooftop, breathing hard as the rescue helicopter vanished into the night, leaving him behind. His body ached from the fall, but he was alive. Now, he needed a way down. Peering over the edge, he saw the parking lot below, swarming with zombies. No chance. Then, movement on the adjacent rooftop caught his eye. A woman. Armed. She aimed a rifle at him. Ethan froze. Are you bitten? She called. No. She studied him, then motioned. Then move your ass. I have a way out. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He jumped onto the fire escape, making his way to her rooftop. As he climbed over, she tossed him a pistol. Who the hell are you? Ethan asked. She smirked. A survivor. That's all that matters. Ethan nodded. Right now, that was enough. Detective Mark Davis, the rules have changed. Mark Davis stepped over the fresh corpse of the man he had just shot. He didn't regret it. Trust no one. That was the only rule that mattered now. Reloading his shotgun, he moved through the police station, gathering supplies. If he was going to survive, he needed weapons, food, and a sound. A radio transmission. He froze, adjusting the frequency. All survivors, Head to the city docks. We have a safe zone. Repeat, city docks. A safe zone. Mark exhaled. Maybe all hope wasn't lost. But getting to the docks meant crossing a city full of the undead. Still, it was better than waiting to die here. Grabbing a shotgun, he pushed open the station doors and stepped into the streets. Time to move. The survivors' paths began to cross. Sarah and her group sprinted toward the delivery truck. The undead snarled behind them, their moans growing louder. The doors were unlocked. A miracle. They climbed inside and slammed the doors shut just as the first zombie crashed against the metal. Breathing hard, Sarah looked out the windshield. And froze. In the distance, she saw two figures moving across a rooftop. One was armed. Survivors. Sarah didn't know who they were. But right now, she didn't care. They weren't alone. The first 24 hours were almost over. But the nightmare was far from finished. The city was collapsing. Fires burned in the distance, sirens had long since gone silent, and the streets belonged to the dead. But even as the undead feasted on what remained of civilization, the true danger wasn't just the infected, it was the living. Sarah Mitchell, nowhere left to run. Inside the delivery truck, Sarah and her group sat in silence, their breathing heavy. The undead pounded on the metal walls, their hunger relentless. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead. We're trapped. No, Sarah said, her eyes locked on the two survivors on the rooftop ahead. A man and a woman. Armed. Moving fast. If they could make it to them. She turned to the others. We need to move before they get inside. Emily swallowed hard. We barely made it here. How do you expect us to get past them again? Sarah took a deep breath. We go through the buildings. No streets, no open ground. Liam, still shaken, mumbled, what if they're not friendly? Sarah tightened her grip on the bat. Then we make sure we hit first. Ethan Carter, a dangerous offer. On the rooftop, Ethan followed the mysterious woman across a series of connected buildings. She moved quickly, her rifle slung over her shoulder. Where are we going? He asked. She didn't look back. Safe house. A few of us set it up before things got bad. Ethan narrowed his eyes. A few of you? She stopped at the edge of a fire escape, finally facing him. Two others. Tough guys. We've got food, water, weapons. Ethan didn't like the way she said it. Like a baited hook waiting to be swallowed. What's your name? He asked. Riley. She climbed down the ladder, motioning for him to follow. Ethan hesitated for just a second. Something about this felt off. But he had no better option. For now. Detective Mark Davis, The Streets of Death. Mark moved fast. The undead were everywhere, but his years as a cop gave him the edge. He knew the city, its alleys, shortcuts, places no one ever used. His goal? The docks. If there was even a chance of a safe zone, he had to take it. As he passed the smashed pharmacy, he spotted something useful, a dirt bike, half buried under debris. Mark smirked. Jackpot. The gas tank wasn't full, but it was enough to get him through the worst of the city. As he pulled the bike free, a low voice came from behind him. That's mine. Mark spun, his shotgun raised. 3 men stood in the shadows. Armed. Not zombies. Worse. Not anymore, Mark said. One of them grinned. We could make a deal. Mark cocked his shotgun. Or I could just leave you here. A tense silence followed. Then, a gunshot rang out. Not from them. From the next street over. The group froze. The undead turned toward the noise. Mark knew what was coming. Good luck, he muttered, before kicking the bike to life and speeding off. Behind him, the screams of the living filled the night. The survivors' paths began to converge. Sarah and her group crept through the abandoned buildings, avoiding the undead outside. Ethan followed Riley into an unknown safe house, unsure if he had just made a huge mistake. Mark rode through the dead city, heading toward a possible safe zone, or a trap. The first 24 hours were almost over. But the real fight? It was just beginning. The first 24 hours of the apocalypse had pushed every survivor to their limits. Now, as the dead closed in and trust among the living grew scarce, one question remained: how far would they go to survive? Sarah Mitchell, into the lion's den. Sarah led her group through the dark, abandoned buildings, their footsteps cautious. Every shadow felt like a trap. Every creak of the floorboards sent their hearts racing. Emily whispered, "Are you sure this is safer than the streets?" Sarah peered through a broken window. Below, zombies clogged the roads, shambling between abandoned cars. "You tell me," she whispered back. Suddenly, a noise, metal shifting up ahead. They froze. Jake raised his broken table leg. What was that? Before Sarah could answer, a flashlight blinded them. A voice followed. Rough. Sharp. Male. Well, look what we found. The light moved, revealing two men with rifles. Looks like fresh supplies just walked into our home. Sarah's grip on the bat tightened. They weren't alone anymore. But these weren't friends. Ethan Carter, the safe house that wasn't. Ethan stepped inside the so-called safe house, his gut twisting. Riley closed the door behind him, locking it with a heavy bolt. The room was lit by flickering lanterns. The walls were lined with stolen goods, canned food, ammo, backpacks that clearly didn't belong to them. And then Ethan saw them. Two men. Armed. Smirking. Watching him too closely. Riley leaned against the wall. Boys, meet Ethan. He's useful. Ethan's grip on his fire axe tightened. One of the men chuckled. He better be. Ethan now understood. This wasn't a safe house. It was a trap. Detective Mark Davis, nowhere is safe. Mark sped down the ruined streets, weaving between wreckage and scattered corpses. The docks. That was the goal. If the radio message was real, that was his only shot at getting out of this nightmare alive. As he turned a corner, something slammed into him. Mark crashed, rolling across the pavement. His shotgun skidded away. Pain exploded through his body, but he forced himself up. A man stood over him. Not a zombie. Alive. Armed. Smiling. You're fast, old man, the stranger said. But not fast enough. Mark gritted his teeth. He had no gun. No bike. No choice. The stranger pulled a knife. Mark lunged. The survivors' fates collide. Sarah and her group had walked into a trap. If they didn't act fast, they wouldn't be walking out. Ethan realized he had made a grave mistake. Trusting Riley might cost him his life. Mark was in a brutal fight for survival, against a man just as desperate as he was. The first 24 hours were almost over. But now? The real horror was beginning. The first 24 hours had pushed every survivor to the edge. Now, as the dead roamed freely and the living turned ruthless, there was only one rule: kill or be killed. Sarah Mitchell, the ambush. The two armed men grinned as they stepped forward. Their rifles weren't aimed, yet. Easy now, the taller one said. Drop your weapons, and maybe we don't kill you. Sarah glanced at Jake and Emily. They were outgunned. Surrender wasn't an option. The shorter man stepped closer. We'll take your supplies. And her. He jerked his chin toward Emily. Emily's eyes widened in horror. Sarah snapped. She swung her bat, shattering the short man's knee. He collapsed with a scream. Jake lunged, slamming his table leg into the second man's face. Gunfire erupted, too close. Too loud. Sarah tackled Emily behind a counter as bullets tore through the walls. The gunshots drew attention. A deep, guttural moan came from outside. Then another. And another. The undead were coming. Sarah locked eyes with Jake. "We run. Now." Jake nodded, yanking the gun from the injured man's hands. They had weapons now. But were they any safer? Ethan Carter, the deal with the devil. Ethan stood in the safe house, surrounded by Riley's gang. He was outnumbered, outarmed, and running out of time. Riley smirked. "So, Ethan. You with us or against us?" Ethan glanced at the stolen supplies. The bloodstains on the floor. These people weren't survivors. They were killers. He forced a smile. "I'm with you." Riley's eyes narrowed. "Prove it." She tossed him a knife. "Kill that man," she said, pointing to a bound, gagged survivor in the corner. Ethan's heart pounded. If he refused, they'd kill him instead. But if he did it, he'd become just like them. The bound man's eyes pleaded. Ethan gripped the knife. And made his choice. Detective Mark Davis, the hunter becomes the hunted. Mark fought like a cornered animal. The stranger's knife slashed across his arm, but Mark barely felt it. Adrenaline took over. He drove his elbow into the man's gut, making him stumble. Mark lunged for his shotgun. The man tackled him. They hit the pavement hard. The knife pressed against Mark's throat. Then, a shriek. A zombie grabbed the man from behind. His scream was cut short as teeth tore into his neck. Mark rolled away, grabbed his shotgun, and fired. The zombie's head exploded. Breathing heavily, Mark stood. Blood dripped from his wound. His vision blurred. But he wasn't dead. And as long as he was alive, he was going to make it to those docks. The survivors' paths are set. Sarah's group barely escaped the ambush, but at what cost? Ethan had a choice to make: join the killers or fight back. Mark was injured, but still moving toward the last hope of safety. The first 24 hours were almost over. But the nightmare had only begun. The first 24 hours of the apocalypse had changed everything. The weak had perished. The strong had been tested. But as the sun began to rise over a ruined city, the surviving few faced a grim truth: there was no going back. Sarah Mitchell, nowhere left to run. Sarah, Jake, and Emily burst out of the building, weapons gripped tightly. Behind them, the moans of the undead grew louder. Gunfire had drawn a horde. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. They sprinted down a narrow alley, desperate to escape. "Where the hell are we going?" Jake panted. Sarah didn't know. She just knew they had to keep moving. A ladder leading to a rooftop caught her eye. Their only chance. "Up there," she shouted. Jake climbed first, dragging Emily up after him. Sarah followed, swinging her bat at a zombie that nearly grabbed her foot. She pulled herself onto the rooftop and froze. Across from them, on another rooftop, stood two figures. Armed. Watching them. One of them was a man she recognized. Ethan. And beside him? A woman with a rifle. Sarah didn't know if they were allies or another threat. But the undead were climbing the ladder now. There was no time to think. They had to jump. Ethan Carter, the cost of mercy. Ethan held the knife. The bound man trembled in front of him. Riley's gang waited for blood. Ethan made his choice. He turned the knife on Riley. She barely had time to react before Ethan slashed across her arm, making her stumble. The other two gang members grabbed their guns, but Ethan was faster. He threw the knife at one, hitting him in the throat. The other man fired, but missed. Ethan lunged, grabbing his rifle and slamming the stock into his head. Riley, clutching her wound, stared at him in shock. "You made the wrong choice," she hissed. Ethan aimed the rifle at her. "No," he said. "I didn't." A gunshot rang out. Riley collapsed. Ethan turned to the bound man, cutting his ropes. "We need to get out of here." The man nodded. I know a place. The docks. Ethan had no reason to trust him. But after what he had just done, there was no staying here. Detective Mark Davis, the last hope. Bleeding, exhausted, but still alive, Mark reached the docks. His heart pounded. Were the rumors true? Was there really a safe zone here? Then he saw it. A fenced compound. Survivors on the walls. Armed guards patrolling. It was real. A voice shouted from above. Identify yourself. Mark raised his hands. Detective Mark Davis, he called. I heard your transmission. The guards whispered among themselves. Then, the gates creaked open. Mark took a step forward. Salvation was within reach. But something felt wrong. Then he saw them. Inside the so-called safe zone, people were being lined up. Disarmed. Separated. A sinking feeling settled in Mark's stomach. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was something else. The survivors' fates are sealed. Sarah's group was trapped on a rooftop. Their only way forward was a dangerous leap of faith. Ethan had turned against his captors. But was the man he saved leading him into another trap? Mark had reached the docks. But was this place truly safe, or just another nightmare? The first 24 hours were over. But the real fight for survival had only just begun. The end, or the beginning?